The following presentation is being aired for information purposes only. The views and opinions expressed are those of the content creators and do not necessarily reflect the views or position of City West or City West Community Channel 10. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello?
For this is
Okay. Mortals have dreams of love's perfect schemes. That's not why I'm here. Let's just get your attention before we begin. I tell you, my tribal name is Algam and I'm from the Raven clan, and my tribe is the Gitral Gyats. And I had a feast in 2008, which allows me to come and do a welcome to everybody that is here. What? Sim gigat, lach gigat to get a manana. Had a couple of waxik. I saw him to oil, so Khanis nurse, and well, got God to some sack out. Chiefs, matriarchs, princesses, and our honored guests that are here today, on behalf of the 9 tribes of Lachol Lamsa and Metakata, I want to bid you a very warm welcome, and I hope you will pay very close attention, and I'm glad that you are here. This is quite a competition to compete with the All-Native Basketball Tournament for our people. Anyway, they kicked me out, our team lost, so I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Murray. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here as well, and I'd like to acknowledge the ancestral lands that we stand on and sit in with the Tsimshian people. Thank you for welcoming us here, Murray. My name is Kadachech. I'm a Chayisla from Kitimat of the Beaver tribe, and I'm currently the chairperson for the Friends of Wild Salmon, and we've been assisting with this somewhat, but really the main organizations that are hosting this evening is the Cane Island Elder Society together with the Wild Salmon Center. And my friend Marius Robletsky, who is here somewhere, introduced us to the main reason that brings us here tonight, the issue of the impacts on Sakhalin Island and the folks that are here from Russia. When we heard the description that Marius gave us with respect to the issues that are confronting the people there, we thought immediately that we needed to get them over here, because of the issue that is confronting us all out here on Flora Bank and Agnew Bank and Lelu Island. So you're going to hear some firsthand issues coming from a facility that I believe has been there for 10 years on Sakhalin Island. And we think it's important that we be informed as much as we can with respect to what's in store for us. So I'd like to say that we got a couple of things going on. First of all, Jonathan Moore, who some of you may have heard during the recent Salmon Nation Summit over here in one of the local hotels, done a presentation. So I think we've got a 25-minute, is it 25-minute clip of Dr. Moore's presentation, and we'd like to share that with you because we think it's informative, and it does talk about the science that is so important to this issue. So that's the first thing, order of business, is we're going to look at that. And then after that, I'm going to ask Marius to introduce the folks from Sakhalin Island and the representative of the people that are here. And then we'll hear from them. I believe their presentations will be 10 minutes or so each. And after that, we're hoping that we have enough time and that you stick around for some questions and answers if we can do that. So, Greg, I guess you can go right ahead with it. Do we need the lights dimmed?
Okay, so my goal today is to talk about the science. And so what I've been doing is working in this estuary area for about 3 years now, and we've been working in partnership with Skeena Fisheries Commission and Loch Kalam's fisheries team, and we've learned a lot about the estuary in general, and we can use that knowledge to understand the potential risks that PNW LNG poses. So that's my goal, to overview the science, what we've learned about this place, and then take the logic to the next level in terms of what that science might mean. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. This is the proposed project. Large bridge, large offloading facility, and large cooling facility. And in general, what I'm going to do over the next little bit of time is to address these two general questions. What do we know about this ecosystem? And that is going to mostly draw upon work that we've done, again in collaboration with Loch Kalam's and Skeena Fisheries Commission. And then secondly, what might the potential risks of the project be? And to understand those potential risks, I think we need to really link what we know about the ecosystem and the fish with the actual plans, and then with what we've learned from other places where there have been large industrial projects and salmon, to see how those two get along or not. So that's how this talk's going to unfold. So this is a picture you just saw, but this is the area in question. This is right where the Skeena, the river, meets the sea. And so you can see the sort of murky water of the Skeena meshing with the green-blue water of the ocean. So all the sediments, all the nutrients that the Skeena is carrying down mix with the nutrients from the ocean, and that's what forms this estuary habitat. And right here is that floor bank area. This is a sandy area. It's about 2.5 or 3 kilometers long, so it's a big habitat, and this is where most of the eelgrass of the entire Skeena estuary is located. So that's sort of what it looks like from the air. Frankly, it's hard to get a sense for the scale for me from looking at this picture. And so if you actually get your boots on and go out to Floor Bank at low tide, this is what it looks like. So way off in the distance, you can see Kitson Island. So there's this whole sandy area, eelgrass area, all the way out to the Kitson Island. And the bridge would go past this to the right a little bit. So it's a large, large habitat. So this is what it looks like at low tide. And if you keep on standing there and let the tide come up, it might look more like this. So again, the Kitson Island in the background, but you might see the sort of marine ecosystem, including its fish, start to come into this habitat. So as part of the environmental assessment, PNW has made statements such as this: salmon do not use floor bank eelgrass habitat for nursery habitat or other life-dependent processes. And they've stated this area has low habitat productivity and value. So this is a very important statement, because if this is true, then the project might pose low environmental risks. And so one of our goals was to see whether the data back up, whether the actual numbers support this statement. Okay, so I'm going to try to address really 3 pretty simple questions with the work that we've done over the last 3 years. First question is where? Where are salmon in the estuary? Do they use different places equally, or are some places particularly important for them? Are there more salmon in some places compared to other places? And this will help us understand key questions about this project, like, is it a good place in terms of environmental risks to salmon? Second question is how long? How long do salmon hang out in this estuary? Salmon they can swim fast. They might only be this big when they're young, but they can move 15 to 20 kilometers in a single day. So maybe they're just swimming through and not hanging out, and they don't need the habitat, and they don't need the food web. So that's the second question. And the third question is who? What species of salmon use this place? and which populations of salmon. Where are these fish from? And thus, what populations might be impacted if there are negative effects of this project. Collectively, I'm hopeful that these three questions will lead us to the last question. That's the what. What are the potential effects of this proposed project? Okay, so we've been doing this for 3 years now. We spent 100 boat days. We've hauled in that net 500 times, and we've collected about 100,000 juvenile salmon. So we've learned a lot. We've collected a lot of information. It's simple information. How many fish are here? That type of thing. But it's really important data. And it can help us address these questions. Another key sort of identifying feature of the research program, this collaborative research program, is that it is, and I'm totally biased, but I think it's undeniable, but this is really high quality science. And so we're publishing it in peer-reviewed journals. So what that means is that we write it up, we analyze the data, we send it out, and then it goes out to scientists who aren't affiliated with any of these projects, and they say whether or not it's good or not. And then that's what makes it go through peer review and get published. And so that's how we sort of meet this gold standard of science. And so that's what our science is doing, is it's getting published, and it's attracting attention as well. Okay, so this is a video. It's not going to work, so I'm just going to describe it. Imagine this is a purse seine. This is what we use to collect the juvenile salmon. Basically, we have this net, 150 feet long at least, and encircle an area, and then just haul it in. And the data we collect is just simply what fish did we catch there? How many baby Chinook? How many baby coho? Maybe we caught smelt, or maybe we didn't catch anything. And we do this in different places, and then we can figure out which fish are there and when. So if we just back up, this is probably, basic life history biology of salmon that you all grew up on. But salmon go through this estuary 2 times during their life. And so, for example, in the Skeena estuary here, all those young salmon from throughout the watershed, a watershed that's the size of the country of Switzerland, all those salmon swim down, so it's about 100 million or 200 million each year in about 5 months from now or so. And they go through this estuary, and then they go out to sea for a year or 2, and they come back again as adults. And so what happens during this phase, this young sort of phase where they're graduating from fresh waters to salt waters, where they go through this tricky sort of puberty of salmon, where they have to learn how to deal with going from fresh water to salt water and not messing up their gill structure, and also potentially growing, escaping from predators in this sort of semi-turbid but rich waters. And there has been some work from other places that has suggested that this estuary phase of the salmon life cycle, while we don't know as much about compared to other phases, it can control, ultimately, how many return to spawn or are caught by fisheries. So this is what it might look like. This is a young salmon in this eelgrass habitat in the estuary. It'll then go out to the ocean, spend a couple years, come back, make its way up and spawn, change into these beautiful colors. It might actually get eaten by a bear or some other wildlife, or it might get caught in a fishery. And so this is what we're talking about. This is the migration. This is the life cycle and how it unfolds over this estuary and over this place that we're talking about. All right, first question. What are the sort of patterns of the numbers of salmon in these different areas? And I'm going to start by sort of a broad scale, looking across the Skeena estuary, and then I'm going to hone in towards smaller scale, more resolution. So what we did is we compared salmon densities, basically the number of fish in each net set of these young salmon in these 5 different regions. Up north, a little bit outside this inner region, the red box, and then farther south. And this red box is around the area we're talking about. It includes Lelu Island and Flora Bank. What we discovered is that this inside north region had the highest salmon densities out of all the regions we looked at. So there's, depending on which region you compared it to, but there's 2 to 7 times more coho salmon in this area compared to the other region. There's 2 to 8 times more sockeye salmon, and there's 2 to 6 times more juvenile Chinook salmon.
What do you mean by the inside north? Like, which one of those was that?
It's the red box.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, thanks. So this area we're talking about, this inside north, this area where the development is proposed for, is the area that has many times more salmon than the other areas. And this is just a picture of us holding up some of those young salmon with the drilling rig from PNW right in the background. And I took this picture because we just kept on hearing that there weren't salmon in this area, and yet we were holding them in our hands. There were salmon there, it turns out. Okay, but maybe this is a regional pattern, and maybe that the Flora Bank area in particular, and the actual project footprint, doesn't have more salmon. Maybe this doesn't have as high potential risks. So this last year, what we did is we designed a study where we could dig into this a little bit more. So we looked at 25 sites from more of the sort of harbor area down through Kinahans and around Lelu and Flora. And what we could do with this study is we made it a little bit more sophisticated by comparing different habitats. So comparing eelgrass habitats up north to eelgrass habitats around Flora Bank to make sure we weren't comparing apples and oranges. Frankly, what we found was even more remarkable. We found that if you look at, for example, only eelgrass habitats, compare eelgrass habitats from farther north to eelgrass habitats right around where the project's proposed for, we found 25 times more salmon in the proposed project areas. And so that's all the salmon, all species put together. We found all species. We found chum, we found coho, we found pink, sockeye, chinook. For example, we found 16 times more coho, 15 times more chinook, and 75 times more sockeye in the proposed project area compared to other areas. You think about those numbers, and one way to sort of flip them on their head is that if you build something there, and if it hurts the salmon, it'll have 25 times worse impacts than if you build it somewhere else.
So you look at the number of returns you expect every year and use that math.
We haven't gone there yet. That's where we need to go. Okay, so if we just sort of go to our roadmap, if we look at the where question, is this a place that's important for salmon? Yes, there are way more salmon in the Flora Bank, Lelu Island area compared to other places in the estuary. Okay, how long? How long are salmon hanging out in this area? And this is really important, I think, because perhaps salmon are just using this area as a highway. Maybe they're just swimming through there as fast as they can. They don't care about food. They don't care about habitat because they're just swimming. That's an important question. Okay, so to deal with this question, we turned to a pretty powerful scientific technique that I'm excited about, and it's using these chemical markers called stable isotopes. And so unlike radioisotopes, which are decay and are radioactive, stable isotopes are basically naturally occurring varieties of elements that have an extra neutron. So they're a tiny bit heavier, and we can measure the amount of that extra neuron variety compared to the regular variety, and it tells us the stable isotope value. That's sort of a long-winded, sciencey way of saying that it's a good chemical tracer for the type of energy that's fueling the food web. So, for example, the chemical tracers that are in my tissues are going to be a function of what I eat. So say in New Year's I had a resolution to lose some weight. I need to lose weight. So I decided to go from a meat diet to a salad diet. And you start taking blood from me, you can figure out, okay, this guy has a meat diet, and then New Year's hits, I hit that resolution, and I only eat salads. Over time, my blood is going to start looking more and more salad-like. And actually, it turns out we know how fast that'll happen. It turns out blood turns over, about half of it turns over every 7 days. And so in 7 days, I'm going to be halfway between meat and salad. The cool thing is you can know that and then figure out when I did that diet switch. And so that's exactly what we did for salmon. And so here we have this plot. It doesn't really matter, but we have carbon, that's one of our tracers, and we have sulfur, that's the other tracer. And this is just a schemata of what we know will happen to salmon if they hang out and feed and reside in the estuary. So we have the signature of freshwater instead of salad, and then we have the signature of estuary. Those are very different. We got those data from collecting salmon from way upstream and from fish that hang out all the time downstream, like herring and smelt. And then we can collect the salmon in the estuary, take some of their muscle, and we know how fast that changes, and we can figure out, oh, do they look like they're from fresh water, even though we caught them in the estuary, and so they've only been there for a day or so? Or are they sort of on their way towards estuary, so they've been there a week? Or have they been there for weeks to months? So that's the data that we could collect. We collected that for all species of salmon in the floor bank region, and we ran all those data. So what this could tell us is, for example, are the fish just passing through? Are they using this area like a highway? Or are they hanging out, feeding, and residing? Are they relying on the food web? Are they relying on the habitat? These are the data. So what you see here is Chinook salmon stable isotopes. You can see that their chemical signature is a mix of freshwater and estuary, but then a lot of individuals are more towards the estuary. And because we know how fast their muscle turns over, we can say that many of these individuals have been in the estuary feeding, eating for weeks, several weeks, and sometimes even more than a month. So the question was raised, how long these fish are hanging out in this habitat, and it's a long time. It's weeks to months. They rely on the food web. They're feeding on the food web. What happens there might affect them. Another thing we discovered is that bigger fish had resided in the estuary for longer. This makes sense, but it also demonstrates that as they're hanging out in the estuary, they're growing very fast. And how fast they grow will control whether or not they survive in the ocean. So this is a really strong data illustrating that these fish are relying on the food web. It's helping them grow, and previous work has shown that that growth will control their survival. So we're asking this question of how long. We've discovered the scientific data demonstrates that salmon are feeding, rearing, and growing for weeks to months. I showed you the Chinook data. We have data for all the species. They're slightly different. Some species tend to go through more quickly, like sockeye salmon. But from all species, there's individual fish that are hanging out there for at least a week or two. So all species are not transiting. They're residing. They're using this habitat in the food web. All right, let's ask this question of who. Well, we already know which species. We know that all salmon species hang out here. We found highest abundances of them, and we found all species. But what about which populations of salmon? To this we turn to genetics. And so what we can do is we can take a little fin clip and we can ask the fish, where are you from? And so what this basically does is it's like taking a little clip of your fingernail. And then we work with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and they can send it off to their stock ID library and look up where that fish is from. And so we've been doing this for the last several years on sockeye and Chinook salmon. Those are the species for which those genetic baselines are well categorized. What we discovered is that the floor bank area supports over 50 populations of salmon from throughout the Skeena watershed and actually beyond. We found fish from the Nass, we found fish from the Central Coast as well. So we have this little habitat. Habitat's about 5 kilometers by 5 kilometers, but yet it's used by salmon that had come from an area the size of Switzerland. Accordingly, these fish support fisheries from this whole area as well, and so these fish go and come from and go back to at least 11 different First Nations territories. And the more we look, the more fish populations we find. And frankly, it's not surprising. You have this habitat at the base, this enormous tree, and of course it all has to funnel through there, but this data demonstrates it. You can't deny that what happens in this place could affect the whole. This is the data that demonstrates that. And this finding was peer-reviewed and published in the journal Science, which is the most prestigious journal in the world. Okay, so one of the things we also did is we caught a lot of fish that weren't salmon. And so most of the fish we caught actually weren't salmon. They were smelt or herring or perch or something like that. And so we can also learn about how they may use this habitat as well. And so, for example, we discovered that herring spawn on Flora Bank. And actually the proponent in their most recent data found eelgrass with herring eggs on it. And we observed spawning aggregations. To the best of my knowledge, and this is coming from somebody who doesn't live here and doesn't know the system as well as many of you, this is the first time this has been described. This is the first discovery of a potentially new population of herring that uses this for spawning habitat. Smelt also use this habitat for spawning. We saw spawning aggregations of them as well, and both these species use these for rearing. So these little fish, about the size of hot dogs, and they're basically the hot dogs of the sea too, because everything eats them. Seals, sea lions, big Chinook, and actually people do too. So fisheries are reliant on these species as well. So it's not just salmon, other species, this habitat really is important to them. That's what the data says. So we can take that data, we can sort of look at this statement critically based on data and ask whether or not it's true. And frankly, it's just not true. There's no way around it. The statement is scientifically false. And all of this is leading to this conclusion that Flora Bank region is habitat of critical importance for the rearing of juvenile salmon. But the crazy thing is that I didn't say this actually. Some people back in '73 said this. And so Higgins and Schoenberg did a study. They are fishery scientists, they did it for the province, and they found pretty much the same thing. Our data expands this, we've learned more, but they said the same thing. Well, they said this. Okay, so if we step back, we can ask ourselves, well, what have we learned about this place? We've learned that this is not a very good place in terms of potential risks if the project has potential risks. So maybe it won't actually do anything. So I'm just going to touch on that really quickly. So what are potential pathways of risks that are posed by Pacific Northwest LNG project? So there's a lot. These are just some of them. And, if we think about these different pathways, we can learn about them not only from the description of the project from the proponent, but then also from past work that's been done elsewhere that's looked at large industry projects and estuaries and how they may adversely affect fish or people. So, for example, this project would emit approximately 4,400 tons of nitrogen oxide and 200 tons of sulfur oxide every year into the atmosphere. These are compounds that cause acid rain. So that's one pathway of risk. We know from studies in the area that the lakes and rivers in this area are particularly vulnerable to acid rain. They have low capacity to neutralize that acid. Oops. And there's this huge body of literature. All these are different studies that have looked at these different pathways. So I'm not just making this stuff up. There's a huge body of literature, science literature, been peer-reviewed, and it all speaks to the different pathways by which a large project like this, through multiple different mechanisms, could affect negatively these fish. So another pathway might be the removal of terrestrial vegetation. That's a fancy way of saying basically they cut down all the plants and remove all the soil with a small little buffer strip around the edge. There's a lot of reasons why that could affect the area around it. One obvious one is that the bugs that fly from the forest into the estuary actually are important food for baby salmon. There's been repeated studies that found that. Actually, the proponent has found that the diets of young salmon in this area have a lot of bugs that come from the forest. So that's a pathway. Another obvious pathway is habitat alteration. So there's an offloading facility, as Greg mentioned, that's 690,000 cubic meters of rock and sediment that would be removed. That's a big number, and if we put that into context, that's the equivalent of filling up this whole building, this Highliner building, 9 times with sediments and rock. Some of those sediments have high levels of dioxins and furans. Those are compounds. They came from the old pulp mill and old industry, but they've been buried in the sediments right now. There's the concern that that might get resuspended and put back into the food web. Those compounds cause feminization, so they turn fish from being females towards being sort of males. And so fish that are exposed to these no longer can naturally reproduce. And the same process affects people as well. So communities with high levels, high exposure to dioxins and furans have fewer men than women. That's another pathway. The proponent has said that they're going to take the really heavy, the really highly laden sediments and put those not in sea where the other sediments would go, but they put them in a storage facility on the island. The other pathway that Greg mentioned is this big pipeline that would wrap around. It's not part of the current environmental assessment, but it's obviously part of the project, and that would have huge amounts of dredging associated with it as well, through Horsey Bank, through Agnew Bank. All that would increase the turbidity. That turbidity can either smother or shade the eelgrass in the area. There can be accidental spills of contaminants. The bridge and the trestle structure also poses concern. Other work has found that salmon actually don't like to swim underneath bridges and estuaries. I don't know why, but that's what the data says. Maybe it attracts predators that eat them. Maybe it changes the little local food web. But studies have repeatedly found that salmon don't like to swim under bridges and trestles. And so what that means is that could either interfere with the pathway of salmon, as you have this 2.7 kilometer long bridge, or at the minimum, it represents degraded habitat, and that has not been accounted for in the current environmental assessment. This project also would alter the currents in the area potentially, and so you think about 264 pilings that are 1.2 meters in diameter, and that will shade the floor bank area from currents. And I just want to talk about that really quickly. So work by Patrick McLaren, Dr. Patrick McLaren, he worked with La Colombes, and what he did is he was interested in learning about the sediments of Flora Bank to try to understand how a project like this might affect the ecosystem, and particularly the sediments that sort of that compose the building block of this habitat. So what he did is he went out and he collected a bunch of data. He dropped this little grab sampler. They collected 2,400 samples. He'd figure out how big the sediment was in each place, whether it's small little mud or whether it's bigger sand. And what he discovered was that Flora Bank is a relic from the last glacier, deposited by this last glacier. It's this really pretty unique, large sand that you don't see in other parts of the estuary. And what he posited was that this is held in place by the balances of forces, so the river power against the tidal power and the current power. And so you have this dynamic equilibrium, the pushing that's opposed to each other, and the thinking is that's what holds Flora Bank in place right now. Of course, you build a big structure that's got 264 pilings on one side of it, and the concern is that'll interrupt that power on that side, it'll shift the balance, and there could be this catastrophic erosion of Flora Bank. The proponent has done 3D modeling and they say that demonstrates that will not happen. I'll note that the data that goes into that model was minimal. It's one way to say it. So we have all these different pathways of risks, and frankly, I don't know which ones will happen. I don't know what would happen to salmon if this project was built. But what I do know is that previous studies repeatedly have found when you have lots of industry development in estuaries, salmon do more poorly. And these studies don't know why. Maybe it's a combination of these things. Maybe it's the habitat alone, maybe it's contaminants, but they don't know why. What they know is that salmon populations are less productive when estuaries are more altered by industry projects such as this. That's what the data says, that's what the science says. The proponent says that, well, yeah, we're going to alter some of this habitat, but we can mitigate for that. We can make other habitat that's better. We're going to help the fish, Rich Coleman said. And so what they've done as part of their environmental assessment, they haven't really outlined a plan in too much detail. They've provided examples such as this. But what they're going to do is they're proposing a series of habitat improvements, and that will compensate the fish for the lost habitat. Scientifically, there's several challenges with this assumption. The first challenge is that what they're proposing to do is alter really good habitat already. So for example, they're trying to place some really, they're basically trying to dump some of the blasted rock from the off-roading facility to create some better fish habitat on these other sides of Lelu Island. Frankly, I have little faith in engineers in being able to improve Flora Bank habitat in Lelu Island. It's already pretty darn good. That logically, that just does not make sense. Scientifically, it doesn't make sense.
It's perfect.
Another problem with this proposal, the mitigation project, is if you look at the data, frankly, mitigation has a very uncertain probability of actually working. So DFO did an audit on mitigation projects. They found that 67% of them, the majority of them, actually didn't make as much habitat as they said they were going to. They actually degraded more or compensated less. So the vast majority of projects actually don't do what they say they're going to do. And then also, if you look at the data, there have been a bunch of papers that have looked at mitigation projects and asked, well, does it work? If they create habitat, do the fish come? Do they grow? And frankly, they usually don't work. The vast majority, I would say 10% of them, according to the review studies, actually work. That's what one paper suggested. So the science suggests that habitat mitigation is unlikely to succeed. Okay, so I started this talk with two questions. The first question is, what do we know about this ecosystem? The second question is, what are the potential risks of the project? We've been looking at the data. The data don't lie, frankly. They're getting reviewed. They're independent. It's what they are. They suggest that this is not a good place for a project. They suggest that this has big risks. So if I step back, it's hard to deny the scientific conclusion the Pacific Northwest LNG poses severe risks to fish, to salmon, from throughout the Skeena watershed and probably beyond. And also poses risks to the people and the economies that rely on those fish. The data indicate that what happens in this area, this small area, could have enormous consequences. And if the project is built, it'll be ignoring science, and it'll be ignoring the risks to fish and the risks to people. Now, on the other hand, stewardship of this small area, this 5 kilometer by 5 kilometer area, think about that. You protect a small area, and all of a sudden, you could benefit fish from the Bear, from the Susstut, from Babine. All these different places could be benefited by stewardship of this place. Thank you.
I think Jonathan needs another round of applause myself. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a brief description of the work done by Simon Fraser University, in which Dr. Moore is an associate professor at. And that work was done in partnership, I believe, with Loch Wallam's Fisheries and the Skeena Fisheries Commission, just so you know where that work came from. And I think that's a perfect lead-in, Marius, to what our friends from Russia would like to speak to us about. I'll hand it over to Marius. Thank you. And by the way, Marius works for the Wild Salmon Center out of Portland, Oregon. And as I was describing here, he told us briefly about the work that is being done over in Sakhalin Island, and he's the reason why we managed to bring the folks over. And I'd like to thank you for that, Marius.
You're welcome. Good evening. Gerald took part of my speech away, and now I'm going to get lost, so please forgive me. First of all, I would like to say, I would like to thank Tsimshian First Nations for welcoming our friends from Russia, my program manager, Leila Loder, and myself to your territory. We are very honored and we're very happy to be here. For last 5 years, I've been working for Wild Salmon Center in Portland, Oregon, running the Russian Far East Conservation Program, Wild Salmon Conservation Program. And you probably know that Russian Far East has almost 45% of the world remaining wild salmon, Pacific wild salmon, and also has some of the greatest conservationists who are fighting to save them. And I'm very happy to be able to know one of them and bring him and his friends here tonight to present to you about their experience with LNG development in very sensitive wild salmon habitat of Sakhalin. Dimitri doesn't really need the introduction in our sort of salmon conservation community. Dimitri has been awarded Goldman Award for exceptional achievements in environmental conservation in 2011 and has been working on wild salmon issues on Sakhalin for many, many years. One of the greatest projects he's been involved in was construction of at that time, probably one of the biggest in the world complexes of oil and natural gas production and processing in a place called Aniva Bay. I am absolutely positive that Dimitri is much better qualified to tell you in more detail about his experience. So I would like to hand it over to Dimitri. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariusz. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for us, for me and for my friends from Russia, to be welcomed on the Tsimshan First Nation territory. Thank you very much. I will tell you about our experience with the giant LNG project on Sakhalin Island, Russian Far East. I work for Sakhalin Environment Watch, non-governmental organization based on Sakhalin Island. And we have been working 20 years already to protect the salmon habitats and salmon biodiversity on Sakhalin Island. And the LNG construction was one of the major challenge for our work and for our salmon. I would like to introduce you my colleagues and friends from Russia. They all are great experts. It's Viktor Afanasyev, which is an expert of geomorphology and the coastal protection issues. Alexander Vidinyov, an expert of noise pollution and acoustic impact on the marine biota, and Alexander Shubin is a fish biologist, specializes on salmon issues more than 30 years already. First slide. The Sakhalin Island is a big island located to north from Japan. It's 960 kilometers length from north to south. The population of Sakhalin Island is 500,000 people. Next one. Sakhalin natural conditions are quite similar with the British Columbia. We also have a lot of salmon spawning rivers and sharp mountain relief, a lot of rains and snow, this is the conditions which make our island is very sensitive for any industrial impact. Next one. Salmon is very important for our economy, for our life. We also have the native people on Sakhalin Island strongly depending on the salmon stocks, and their culture also deeply connected with the salmon. Also, we have a lot of animals depending on the salmon. It's also very important for us. Just our salmon river, it's a pink salmon run. It's a typical situation on Sakhalin Island, on the wild salmon spawning rivers. The Sakhalin-2 project, LNG construction was implemented in frames of Sakhalin-2 oil and gas project. It's a giant project, and it was the really huge construction, and it's around 20 billion US dollars investments into the construction. And you can see here the environmental impact assessment. But in fact, we had not just environment, but also the health, social, and indigenous people lifestyle impact assessments. And it were a lot of debates, argues, and battles around the project at the very beginning stage. And there were a lot of promises to us and a lot of expectations from the lot of local people. Next one. The project includes 3 offshore platforms, oil and gas. The main oil and gas pipeline goes from north to south, and the LNG plant and LNG and oil export terminals on the very productive and very important Aniva Bay. This is Aniva Bay. Okay, next one. The pipeline construction is a really heavy impact on the salmon habitats and salmon spawning grounds. It's various types of impact. It's the contamination of the water by suspended solids, by mud, the sedimentation on the spawning grounds, erosion. Next one. The landslides and mud flows. This is typical examples we were facing during the construction of the pipeline. It's just landslide which flooded the tributary of salmon spawning river. What does it mean? The pipeline on Sakhalin Island crossed 600 watercourses. Most of them are the spawning for salmon, and it means that the water downstreams is very polluted by the suspended solids. There will be the same situation here with the Skina River, because the pipeline is also the part of the LNG project that it needs to be assessed together with collectively with the LNG construction itself, because there will be a cumulative effect and cumulative impact on the salmon from upstream to downstream. And we had the same. But you know, the difference between Sakhalin Island and your situation is that we have very many small-scale rivers distributed around the island. And here on this Skina estuary, all the salmon of the huge river watershed goes through the certain narrow place. It's kind of bottleneck. And the idea to build the huge dirty polluting facility in this bottleneck is a totally crazy and wrong idea from my point of view and from my experience. Yes. Okay. I just wanted to add that the pipeline construction creates the hazards risk. Of course, there will be a gas line on Skina watershed, but it also creates the explosion risk and fire risk in case of leakages of the gas. Next one. Here is just one example of differences between the promises and realities. As the project sponsor and operator promised us that the water will be completely clean just from 10 to 50 meters downstream of the river crossing place of the pipeline corridor construction. But reality is that the water is just starting to get cleaner, a bit cleaner, 2.5 kilometers downstream of the river crossing. Next one. Okay, now I would like to tell you our experience with the LNG construction itself. You can see the Aniva Bay. Aniva Bay is very important for Sakhalin people. It's fishing, it's the resting, it's part of our lifestyle to go to the shores and to, for example, collect the scallops. This is my wife, by the way. And next one. And you can see the LNG plant on the shore. It's during the construction period. Next one. Here we compared the size of the Sakhalin 2 LNG plant and the size. This figure shows the size of Lelu Island. And you have to notice that our LNG plant, Sakhalin LNG plant, is just a half capacity of the Pacific Northwest LNG project. Next one. This is just aerial view. Next one. How the construction site looks like. It's just a part of it. Next one. The dredging works were the major impact on the Aniva Bay and its biota and biological resources. Next one. Another example from probably hundreds example, but just another one that project sponsor promised us at the beginning on the preliminary stage that there will be just 160,000 cubic meters of dredging. But at the very end of decision-making process, they changed the project design, and it became 1 million and almost a half of cubic meters of dredged materials. But final amount was more than 2 million cubic meters of dredging and dumping. You can see here the ongoing dredging works for the LNG export terminal. Next one. The people of Sakhalin Island, and especially the neighboring cities of the LNG plant, together with us, protested a lot in order to prevent the dredging and the dumping of the dredged materials into the bay. But only I think we were able to succeed, despite the massive protests, is just the moving of the timing of dredging from the summer to autumn. Next one. And unfortunately, we were not able to change the dumping zone, which is here in the center part of the bay, instead of the safe dumping zone outside of the bay on the very deep waters. Next one. Just a couple of pictures showing that the dumping zone was straight in the center, or very close to the major habitats of very important resources like snow crab here, next one, and the scallop, and at least 8 species of very important resources. Next one. It's difficult to see here, but just several slides. Next one. Next one. How it looks from the satellites, the dredging works here. Next one. you can see the just dirty waters distributed by sea currents around the bay. Next one. How the sea bottom looked like before the dredging and dumping. It's quite rich biological life, biological resources in the bay. Next one. And this is the same area after the dredging and dumping. Next one. This is the final amount, which is completely different than 160 cubic meters. And what's very important, these rocks were unstable, and they absorbed the water and expanded, and they become the suspended solids. They become a turbidity which sea currents widely distributed around the bay. Next one. And here you can see the results. The silt, the sediments on the seaweed, on the laminaria, and fishermen couldn't collect, catch, and sell the laminaria anymore for 2 or 3 years until the bay just a bit recovered after the impact. Next one. Here in the size of, in comparison with the cars, the size of tankers. The huge tankers generate the infrasound, and infrasound is critically important for the salmon. And my colleague from Oceanology Institute will tell you more about this effect and impact. Next one. Also, the danger of explosion and fire of the LNG is must be strictly estimated and assessed. The LNG hazards risk assessment on Sakhalin Island provided the estimation that one LNG tanker collision per 51 years, which is quite high risks for the dangerous object which can cause huge damage. And the explosion zone, explosion damage zone around the LNG plant is 3 kilometers, but we are sure it's underestimated the size of the zone. Next one. Also, the gas flaring. Any LNG plant is impossible without the flaring gas. It needs to have it all the time. The size of the gas flare is different. It depends on the technological processes. When they are commissioning the LNG plant, the size of the flare was several tens of meters, and it's a huge light pollution. And light pollution is crucial for salmon juveniles because they need a complete dark for migration. We have very good scientific researches showing that these salmon juveniles they stop migration when it's too bright, too light, too much light. For example, in the night with the whole moon, the migration is much less active than in the dark. And the light pollution, light impact must be assessed as well. And it haven't been done on Sakhalin Island, by the way. Next one. Also, the contamination of the air by the gas flaring and another release of toxic waste, toxic contaminants. The Sakhalin LNG plant releases around 10,000 tons of toxic contaminants per year, every year. For example, it releases 2,000 tons of nitrogen dioxide and 300 tons per year of nitrogen oxide, which is a lot, as we think, and very many other very toxic pollutants. Next one. Just the final, but not less important, is an impact on the neighboring community. There is the people, small village of the people living very close to the LNG plant, just a bit more than 1 kilometer. And the company has been refusing to resettle them and provide them compensations 10 years already, which is completely ridiculous, and they violate the Russian legislation. But the company is really strong player, and it's really difficult for small communities to get the fair compensation from them. That's it, and I can't tell you all the negative consequences and negative effects and impacts from this construction, but I definitely have to tell you that it's not a complete disaster on Sakhalin Island. It's important to be fair and balanced, and of course this project provides a lot of revenue for the regional budget. But initially, on the decision-making stage, there was an agreement between Sakhalin Island and federal government that the all revenue will be shared 50-50. 50-50, but now we are receiving just 5% of the whole total revenue of the project instead of 50%. But it's still a lot. It's a huge money, but we still don't have good roads. We still the 40,000 people in the nearest town to the LNG plant still don't have the hot water in their houses, and there are much less real advantages than we expected and we were promised by the company. Thank you.
I just would like to say that we gonna translate some of these presentations, so please forgive us for taking a little bit longer than normally it would, and for if we stumble, we all are not native speakers, and it seems to me like when we translate our English gets even worse. So we're going to be sharing this microphone, so you're going to have to let us know if it's actually working well or not. Oh, cool.
Мое имя Александр Шубин. Я более 30 лет изучал лососевых рыб на Сахалине, по большей части в морской период их жизни.
My name is Alexander Shubin. I have been studying salmon in the marine environment for more than 30 years, mostly on Sakhalin.
Когда я узнал о проекте строительства завода СПГ в устье реки Скины, этот проект меня очень удивил, так как это очень неподходящее место для строительства завода такого.
When I became aware of the LNG project in the Skina estuary and look at the data and information available, I was absolutely shocked that that site has been chosen for that project.
Я хочу рассказать, как на Сахалине лососи уживаются с заводом СПГ, который построен в заливе Онива лет 10 назад.
I would like to tell you about interaction or the life together of Sakhalin salmon in Aniva Bay and the LNG project there.
Первый рисуночек. Я хочу остановиться на тех особенностях залива Анива, у которых нет в эстуарии реки Скина.
I would like to concentrate on certain characteristics of Aniva Bay, which make that place very much different than the estuary of the Skina.
Залив Анива очень большой залив. Ширина его, как вот видите, 95 километров, и длина вовнутрь 80 километров.
As you can see, Aniva Bay is a very large bay, the width at 95 kilometers and the length at 80 kilometers.
Вторая его черта – это глубоководный залив. Наибольшие глубины достигают 90-100 метров.
The second different characteristics of the Aniva Bay is its depth. At the deepest point, it's around 95 to 100 meters deep.
В этом заливе соединяются два течения, поэтому он характеризуется активным водообменом.
In Aniva Bay, two major sea currents collide and cause the dramatically fast circulation of the water.
Вот с учетом этих позиций залив характеризуется тем, что его очень трудно загрязнить.
And because of those currents and because of those characteristics, it's very difficult to keep the bay polluted. The water simply quickly circulates out and fresh water moves in.
На одном из его побережий лет 10 назад вот и построен завод СПГ.
And on the bank of Aniva Bay, 10 years ago, the LNG plant has been built.
На рейде видно судно, которое вывозит сжиженный газ.
You can see the proportions of the LNG tanker to the plant itself. They both are enormous.
Залив Анива богат биологическими ресурсами.
Another characteristic of Aniva Bay is its wealth of biological life.
Там отмечено до 170 видов рыб.
There's up to 170 kinds of fishes.
И более 170 видов беспозвоночных морских донных.
And more than 174 kinds of crab, shrimp, and other organisms of that type.
Однако наибольшее экономическое значение в заливе Анива имеют лососевые рыбы и прежде всего горбуша.
But the most valuable species in Aniva Bay are pink salmon.
В заливе Анива более 70 рек различной величины.
Into the Aniva Bay drains more than 70 different sizes of the rivers, all bearing wild salmon.
Вот следующий рисунок, пожалуйста. Вот на этом рисунке показаны некоторые реки. Нерестилище этих рек характеризуется высоким качеством.
These are examples of these rivers, and probably as you can see for yourself, these rivers are their spawning beds and spawning capacity is of very high quality.
И в них в больших количествах размножается горбуша.
They are the place of the spawning of a majority of pink salmon from Aniva Bay.
Как соотносятся завод СПГ и воспроизводство горбуши в заливе Анива?
I would like to tell you a little bit about the relationship between the existing LNG plant and the productivity of Aniva Bay.
Следующий, пожалуйста. Вот особенность залива Анива в том, что 95% нерестовых рек в заливе расположены в его западной части и северной части. Вот на этом участке находится 95% нерестовых рек и нерестилищ.
95% of the rivers, salmon-bearing rivers, are located on the west side of the Aniva Bay.
А в северо-восточной части залива, там, где расположен завод СПГ, только 5% общих нерестилищ залива.
Only 5% of the spawning capacity of Aniva Bay lies in the area that it's in closer proximity to the LNG plant.
Второй важный момент – это вот устье наиболее крупных рек. Вот залив, вот завод СПГ, вот, например, одна из рек, вот другие реки. Вот устья этих рек находятся на удалении от завода СПГ на расстоянии от 30 до 80 километров.
Another special characteristics of Aniva Bay that the estuaries of the major rivers along the bay are in 30 to 80 kilometers away from the LNG plant, so are very far away from the impact of the plant.
Таким образом, в заливе Анива нерестовые реки и воспроизводство лососей отделены от завода СПГ.
In that way, we see this situation as significant separation of the LNG plant from the critically important habitat for both juveniles and the migrating adults.
В хорошие годы в заливе Анива вылавливается до 60 тысяч тонн горбуши.
In best years in Aniva Bay, the commercial catch of the pink salmon would reach 60,000 tons.
С рек скатывается около 500 миллионов экземпляров молоди лососей, горбуши прежде всего.
From all these rivers annually, approximately 500 million juveniles of pink salmon enter the Aniva Bay.
А в реки заходит 5-6 миллионов экземпляров горбуши.
And return of the adults reaches 5 million
То
fish.
есть в заливе вылавливают и заходит в реки столько лососей, сколько дает только одна река Скина.
I would like to point out that this is very compatible with the Skina. So entire capacity of Aniva Bay is very close to the productivity of the Skina River.
Как и в эстуарии реки Скина и в других районах северной части Тихого океана, молоть лососей после вхождения в морскую среду долго нагуливается либо в эстуарии, либо на прибрежном мелководье.
Very similarly, in the Skina and in Aniva Bay, the juveniles which are leaving the rivers and enter salt water spend from 1 to 3 months in the coastal zone, in the zone of adaptation to the salt water.
Ну, в заливе Анива такой нагул длится до 3 месяцев.
Up to 3 months in Aniva, the juveniles remain within a very close coastal zone, which is shallow and provides them with vegetation to hide and to feed.
Еще одна важная черта воспроизводства горбуши в заливе Анива – это то, что молоть горбуши нагуливается преимущественно далеко от завода.
And one more very important characteristic of pink salmon behavior within Aniva Bay that you can see because of the very deep central part of the bay, the juveniles are staying close to the shore, therefore they remain very far from the LNG plant.
Таким образом, на Сахалине, в заливе Анива, в отношении лососей и завода СПГ есть 3 важных момента.
There are 3 important things to sort of point out in Sakhalin pink salmon and LNG facility relationship.
Завод не мешает взрослым лососям заходить в реки.
The plant is not on the way of the adults migrating to their spawning rivers.
Завод не мешает молоди скатываться с рек.
Therefore, also, the plant is not in the way of juveniles on their way out into the ocean.
И завод не мешает молоди нагуливаться в прибрежье.
And also, as you can see from the map, the plant is not in the area of intense feeding of the juveniles.
Я говорю о большей части, конечно, лососей.
I'm referring to the majority of the juveniles and adults.
При реализации проекта СПГ в эстуаре реки Скина все будет с точностью да наоборот.
After seeing today the Lelu Islands and Flora Banks, I have realized that in the case of the Skeena estuary and the plant proposed there, everything would be actually in reverse. Everything would be the opposite.
Строительство завода и его работа будет мешать заходу производителей лососей в реку.
The construction and operation of the plant will interfere with the with the return of the adults to the fresh water.
Завод будет мешать скату лососей по реке в устье.
Plant's construction and operation will interfere with the outmigration of juveniles from the Skeena.
И будет мешать, конечно, нагулу на банке Флора.
The plant will also interfere with the length and ability of juveniles to feed and remain for a necessary period within a flora bank and the mouth of the Skeena.
Надо понимать, что строительство завода в устье реки Скина – это наихудший вариант из всех возможных в отношении лососей.
From my point of view, after reviewing available to me information, I can say that the plan for current placement of the LNG facility in the estuary of the Skeena is the worst possible version of what could happen.
Если этот... И если этот проект будет реализован, надо, конечно, ожидать резкого снижения численности лососей в реке.
In the case the project would go forward and it would be realized, it is very reasonable, if not certain, that we should expect the decrease in Skeena productivity and decrease in the Skeena salmon population.
И при развитии газовой промышленности Британской Колумбии, видимо, целесообразно использовать сахалинский опыт, где завод СПГ и лососи достаточно хорошо разделены.
I would recommend in any development of LNG projects in British Columbia or anywhere else to use the Sakhalin experience of definitely separating salmon and LNG facility.
It is all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, my friends. First of all, excuse me for my poor English, not enough practice living in Moscow, but I will try speaking English. My name Alexander Vedenyov. I am a head of Noise Ocean Laboratory, Cherchov Institute, Russian Academy of Science in Moscow. I'm a specialist in acoustic impact on marine biota. I was involved in the conservation efforts for Sakhalin project, Sakhalin 1 and Sakhalin 2 since 2001. My laboratory participated in real-time acoustic monitoring to save gray whale, endangered population gray whale, on Sakhalin shelf. We also participate in developing mitigation measure to save this population. Okay. I would like, we have not enough time to go in detail of acoustic impact on noise, underwater noise, but I will try to note the most important things. Please, first. What is noise? What is sound? Sound is pressure wave propagation in air or other media. What is the ideal medium for sound travel? Why? Sound light cannot penetrate to deep water, but sound can. By this reason, sound is main feature, main means for communication for marine mammal and fish. Units that used in the measurement sound level is decibel. Okay, there are three kinds of sound in the ocean. I need to say the sea is very noisy media. Three kinds of sound in the ocean. First, it's a so-called soundscape. It's natural noise. Ambient noise is caused by weather and sea surface phenomena like wind, waves, rain, light strikes, earthquake, crumbling of ice, and so on. The second is biological noise in ocean. And most important for us is man-made noise. Please, next. Now we can see some source of biological noise. It's first of all, it's vocalization and halation of marine mammals, fish sounds, and charus shrimps. You can see the graph with noise level, and you can understand the biological noise when they formed the chorus that may be even bigger than noise from shipping or noise from natural noise from weather condition. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see a lot of the noise level from anthropogenic source. The first line is the most intensive industrial noise. First of all, and maximum of the noise that can be underwater is noise from blasting. It's 207 to 287 decibel. The next very intensive underwater noise from seismic survey during using the air gun as a source for seismic surveying. Next very hard source of noise is pile driving. And second is using of sonar. Also, naval maneuvers, shipping, of course, when very huge supertankers ships the products. Also, offshore wind farm produce noise, and of course, construction on the shore, on the shelf, and scientific research while watching, and so on. Please, next slide. Range of fish hearing. Usually, we estimate hearing by its sensitivity. Audiograms is depends on sensitivity of hearing from the frequency range. Sensitivity of hearing depends on presence of swimming bladder in the fish. Salmon, among them, has type generalist, so-called generalist, that has low frequency hearing in frequency band 10 Hz to 600 Hz. This salmon sensitivity. And from the right, you can see fish hearing range overlap with anthropogenic noise. It's very important because the fish hear in the same range where is maximum of man-made noise. The different source of noise shown on this picture, and hearing range from 10 Hz to some 5, 6, 1 kilohertz. We can see that they overlap each other. And this is very bad for marine biota when its hearing range overlap with intensive source of underwater noise. Next, please. What impact, what can be from noise? There are three types of acoustical impact. First of all, of course, it's changing in behavior, and when level of noise arises, it may be hearing damage and or pathological effects in the tissue. When sound level over 120 decibel, continuous noise or 160 decibel of pulsed noise, then can be changes in the behavior. If noise arises again, high noise level lead to temporary threshold shift of hearing. Temporary threshold shift, it's lost sensitivity for some time. It's not trauma, but it's close to trauma because the hearing can restore maybe in 1 day, 1 week, but if the noise level will be very intensive, it can lead to temporary threshold shift, can lead to permanent threshold shift. It's absolutely acoustic trauma. Concerning our construction noise that we will see some later, we have next threshold. When noise level more than 206 decibel pulsed noise can damage hearing or lead to pathological effects in body tissue. The second type of acoustic impact is masking of marine mammals and fish communication signals. Anthropogenic noise is hindrance to communication, navigation, orientation, feeding, detection of predators, searching of prey, and so on. When the fish can't live, they really can't live when the noise level prevent for here navigation or communication with other species. And third type of acoustic impact is stress. Stress occurs usually when fish or marine mammals prolong a time being in exposure of noise. Prolonged exposure to noise leads to stress and may affect also nervous or immune system. Please, next. Now I describe two operations during construction that maybe will take place if LNG plant will start in your area. The dredging is source of prolonged and continuous noise. Noise level not very huge as in pile driving or seismic survey. It's 155, 185 decibel. Next, please. And main source of noise, this construction ships and other ships that help him walk. There is a different type of dredgers. Cutter suction dredgers, trailing suction hopper dredgers, drag grabbers, and so on. But the source of noise, they're nearly same on different tape. First of all, it's propeller from this on this ship, and also the mechanism that pumping and so on, and of course dredging sound. A very large part of noise may add using thruster. Thruster is additional propeller that help to stay ship in the same place. Near and even more than 10 decibel can add the using thrusters in the construction ship. Of course, the propeller, engine mechanism, pumping, and so on, all this source locate on the construction ship. And you need to understand, usually it's a lot of ships work simultaneously. It's nearly fleet of the ships. For example, on Sakhalin, when during construction, we have working more than 20 ships simultaneously. When pipeline construction, for example. Next slide. What impact from this prolonged noise? On this graph, you can see the level of the noise at different operation. Transit, dredging, rainbowing, pumping, and so on. This noise exceeds 118 decibel. But it's maybe not so much, but the time exposure in this noise lead to stress. From the right, you can see documented effects of dredging and shipping. For example, gray whale and bullhead whales avoid IRS and dredging activity. The ships also avoid and demonstrate this behavioral reaction, avoid and sonified area with high noise level. And other effect, so that the ship, fish can be under stress. It's documented fact. Please, next. Now, pile driving is the most dangerous operation for fish. Use high energy noise source with peak sound pressure level up to 248 decibel. It's very high noise level. Was established the threshold for unacceptable noise. For pile driving, injury of fish at pile driving is expected if either or peak sound pressure level of any strike exceed 206 decibel or sound exposure level. This integrated energy during all period of pile driving accumulated over all pile strikes exceed 187 decibel for fish, 2 gram or larger, and some less level, 183 decibel for fish smaller than 2 grams. You can understand that pile driving is maybe most dangerous operation that will be at construction of the LNG facility in your area. Please, next. Scientific data about possible mortality of fish at pile driving. The fish are potentially impacted by pile driving in estuaries, bays, lakes, streams, and rivers. You can see the graph. On this axis is the noise level, sound exposure level, and this is the mass of the fish. In the area when the fish mass less 1 grams and noise level about 200 decibel, we can see that exists 50% mortality for this juvenile or small fish. It's, of course, very dangerous. Please, next. My conclusions. Man-made noise, underwater sound can impact marine life. Dredging has lower sound levels compared to the pile driving, but at long exposure can lead to fish to stress. Juvenile salmon having small mass with high probability would be killed close to the pile driving. Behavioral impact on masking will occur on both marine mammal and skin of salmon at both stage, construction and exploration of the LNG. Exploration of stage is the using supertanker for transporting gas, liquid gas from this area. And maybe most important results, my estimation, high noise level from LNG plant construction and operation will cause juvenile salmon to prematurely leave flora bank and result in decreased survival in the sea. This is my estimation. Thanks.
Добрый вечер, дорогие друзья. Меня зовут Виктор Афанасьев. Я заведующий лабораторией прибрежных геосистем.
Hello, dear friends. My name is Viktor Afanasyev, and I am the head of the Laboratory of Coastal Geosystems.
Института морской геологии и геофизики Российской академии наук. О, не слышно. Хорошо?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Сюда? Сюда.
So I'm going to repeat this. So his name is Dr. Viktor Afanasyev, and he's the head of the Laboratory of Coastal Geosystems with the Russian Academy of Sciences.
После сегодняшнего посещения места предполагаемого строительства я решил привести несколько примеров.
Today, after visiting the area where the plant is proposed for construction, I would like to share with you some of the examples.
Несколько примеров уровня оценки достоверности воздействий и риска.
Some of the examples of the level of assessment of risks associated with the construction.
В проектах таких маленьких компаний, как Exxon и Shell.
Using the examples of projects of Exxon and Shell.
Следующий. Первый пример.
First example,
Построили. Следующий.
they've built.
Следующий. Никто не ждал, неожиданность случилась. Через 3 месяца все начало рушиться. И вот началась история.
So nobody expected this, but after about 3 months, everything kind of started to collapse.
Неожиданность такая.
It was a surprise to everyone.
Следующий. Вот что мы видим сейчас.
This is what we see now.
Следующий. А всего-то нужно было сдвинуть на 30-40 метров, и не было бы дополнительных затрат в $300 миллионов.
All you had to do was to push those constructions that are crossed with red to about 30-40 meters inland, and you would have saved hundreds of millions of dollars.
Следующий. Второй пример.
Second example.
Это терминал отгрузки нефти того же проекта, Сахалин-1.
This is the offloading terminal for oil for that same project on Sakhalin.
По проекту мониторинга наблюдают за 2-метровыми просадками грунта. Вот здесь
So
вот.
according to the monitoring project they're actually monitoring just 2 small areas, a few meters each in diameter.
Мы прошли в 2013 году по берегу вдоль этого терминала. Я забыл сказать, что терминал расположен на вулканическом плато.
I forgot to mention that the terminal is actually placed on the volcanic plateau.
Это туфы, спекшийся пепел,
That's burnt
обломки
ash
породы и лава застывшая.
And lava.
Следующий. Так вот, этот горный массив напоминает собой за счет внутренней эрозии, вот мы видим,
As you can see erosion on the pictures.
кусок сыра дырявого.
It kind of reminds us of just a piece of cheese with lots of holes in it.
Следующий. Вот. А по шкале Рихтера это зона 9-бальной сейсмической активности.
So this is a highly seismic zone with about 9 points.
В случае землетрясения нагрузки возрастают в сотни раз.
In the case of the earthquake, the pressure is going to raise hundreds of times.
А сверху 200 тысяч тонн нефти, столько же, сколько в Эксон-Валдисе в танкере
And
печальной.
above it is about 200,000 tons of oil, an equivalent of what Valdez had.
Вот вам и уровень оценки риска. Следующий.
And that's just to show you the level of how the risks were evaluated.
Следующий. Next. Подводные трубопроводы. По проектам у нас уже построено более 300 километров подводных трубопроводов.
So we had about 300 kilometers of those pipelines under the
Но
sea
глубина
level built.
заглубления, которая как бы не дает внешним воздействием повредить трубу, такая, что пришлось бороться за ее увеличение примерно в 2-3 раза.
But then it was designed, the actual depth of how deep under the sea level the pipeline had to be buried. He and his team had to redesign it. It actually had to be 2 to 3 times deeper than what it was designed.
И еще по поводу подводных трубопроводов.
Also want to mention something about those pipelines under the seashore.
Весь грунт, который образовался при рытье траншеи, нужно складывать обратно. И тогда будет ровная поверхность.
So all the dredged materials that were excavated had to be put back, and it had to be, ideally, it would be all flat again.
Но в проектах не учитывается, что труба занимает определенное место, и грунт увеличивается при разрыхлении в 1,5 раза примерно.
But during the project planning, they didn't take into consideration the actual the volume of the pipe, the size of the pipe, and other aspects of it. So it actually increases the space that's needed. Actually increases 1.5 times.
Изменяется структура течения, они размокают и разносятся, в общем.
So the currents are changed and affected, and just it's very disturbed.
Ну и вот, в принципе, я мог бы еще 1,5 десятка привести примеров, но
I
не буду ваше
probably can
внимание
still give you maybe about 10 to 15 examples of what was promised and what was really done, but we don't want to take too much of your time anymore.
Приведу пример оценки воздействия на экологию в результате дноуглубления и дампинга.
I would like to just give you an example of the risks assessment on the environment of dredging and dumping.
Информация у нас есть только по первому этапу, по второму нам ее не дали. Мы просили английского посла, швейцарского, президента Банка европейского развития. Не получили информации.
For now, we just have the information on the first stage of the project. We do not have information on the second stage of the project. We have asked the UK authorities, the Swiss authorities, and we were not given this information.
На первом этапе
On the first stage,
вынули 282 тысячи.
they dredged 282,000 square meters.
Грунт увеличился в объеме,
So the dredged material
уже должны были
expanded,
470 тысяч.
and now they actually had to put back
Следующее.
470,000 square meters, cubic meters.
Нет, ты прочитал. Прошла. Нет, обратно. Все? К сожалению, потерялся слайд, но я просто вам скажу, что по технико-экономическому обоснованию от сброса 100% дноуглубления
So I will just share with you that based on the technological assessment, the 100% of what would have been done in terms of dredging,
донные сообщества погибли на площади 92, должны были погибнуть на площади 92 тысячи квадратных метров.
the biota at on the sea level bottom will actually be dead in the radius of
90 тысяч. Нет, метров квадратных. На этой
It would
площади.
be 90,000 square meters. That would be the area where everything will be completely covered and dead.
Однако, сбросив грунт всего от 1/6 дноуглубления, площадь, на которой все организмы погибли, превышала площадь, которая была назначена к 100%, в 5 раз. 400 тысяч. 18% сбросили, 400 тысяч. Куда слайд-то делся? Странно. А зачем?
First he gave this number of 18% of the project, 100% of the project, and the mass that would be actually covering the area. And just at the 1/6 of the project being done, it already had covered 5 times the area that it was told that 100% of the project up until the completion will actually cover. Already 5 times more.
Более того,
Moreover,
существенная доля этого грунта перешла во взвесь и стала в виде суспензии перемещаться по дну залива.
Moreover, that kind of dredged material now started to move around in the Aniva Bay area.
И при самом таком негативном сценарии биота могла погибнуть, но она и погибла, потому что мы имеем данные сейчас некоторых институтов, она могла погибнуть на площади 130 квадратных километров.
So according to data that we have, actually all the biota might have been dead
За счет многократного переноса.
because of all that moving of the dredged materials would have covered 130 million square meters.
Я член экологической вахты Сахалина.
I'm a
Этот
member
слайд вы
of the
видели.
Sakhalin Environmental Watch, so you've seen this slide when Dima did his
Вот
presentation.
эта вот ламинария была обнаружена в 10 километрах, что подтверждает вот наше предположение.
This laminary was actually discovered 10 kilometers away from the site, which actually proves what we are estimating here.
По дампингу и На углубление у нас есть большая очень презентация, порядка там 40 слайдов, но мы решили не углубляться в дебри расчетов, поэтому вот показали вам так кратенько. Один слайд, к сожалению, потеряли. Этот слайд нам наши коллеги из Skin Wild, они нам нарисовали воздействие, перенесенное с нашего региона в ваш. И там получилось, что в принципе может это не прямое воздействие на лосось, но воздействие на донные организмы. Ну, в принципе, в вашем случае это как раз зона размножения мальков.
So he was saying that actually the presentation he has in terms of the impacts of dredging and dumping is about 30-40 slides or more, and we just try to make a very simplified version of it just for it to be understandable. And there is a slide that our colleagues have prepared to give you kind of an idea in terms of how much area would that cover if it was Skinner watershed, and it pretty much covers that area and much more than that area that was proposed for dumping.
Спасибо большое за внимание.
Thank you very much.